anyone who's done anything great, from Henry Ford to Barack Obama to Albert Einstein to Winston Churchill to yourself, Dr. Scheele, everyone has great coaches around them. They didn't do this by themselves. Mm-hmm. They have people that they can say, I learned this from this. I mean, you talk about Dr. Win Wenger all the time. You know, these are the people I learned from, I work with, or that inspired me, because we need people to help level us up to that next level and be a guidepost. And I always say your coach should be a tour guide and not a travel agent.
Welcome to the MINDTRX Podcast with breakthrough ideas to live your best life possible and how to make it happen. I'm Paul Scheele, and today we will be joined by Gerald Leonard. Gerald Leonard offers a unique productivity approach to accomplishing more every day. Gerald is the founder of the Leonard Productivity Intelligence Institute, as well as the CEO of Turnberry Premiere, a strategic project portfolio management and IT governance firm. He is also an author, TEDx speaker, management guru, and importantly, a bass player, bringing all these traits and skills into his presentations and interviews. Hello, Gerald. Welcome to the MINDTRX Podcast. So good to be with you.
Dr. Scheele, I am so excited and happy to be here. I look forward to our conversation, as I've always looked forward to our conversations, and just the wisdom and insight I've learned from you. So I'm really excited to be here.
Oh, thanks so much. Well, you've been obviously a big fan of this kind of work, and you've applied so much of it, not only to your lives, but into your family and into your professional life. And I've seen so much really powerful, exciting growth for you. And that's really what we're here to share with our listeners. So I'd like to start out, before we get into your books and your TED Talk and all the great things that you've accomplished, I'd like to focus on the space that you normally operate in professionally. And it's this idea of project economy. Could you say a bit what that is and the work that you do?
Sure. You know, because of globalization, because of automation, because of AI, and even before AI, much of the work that was being done in organizations is project-based work. And there are trillions of dollars being spent every year on projects. Now, because of the skills, sometimes those trillions of dollars are wasted, right? Because of poor project management. And so it's really the focus of my work is to help project managers and organizations develop the best set of skills and tools and project managers they can to really help them to make the most of the resources, of the constrained resources that they have, and to do the best job they can and with those investments that they receive, because it does have an impact on companies and countries' GDP, as well as just the average American, because a lot of work now is being done as projects.
Okay, so a lot of times in a workplace, we're given tasks.
Yes.
And tasks are different than projects. Projects include a series of tasks, resources, and deadlines. And yet you also speak not just to project management, but also what's called portfolio project management. Could you make that distinction? Why is it important for our listener to know these distinctions in terms of how we show up every single day?
Well, you can think about it this way. Every one of us has a portfolio, even in our homes, right? Because every month we get a certain amount of money that comes in the house. And we have to decide, how do we invest that money? How much is going to go towards our mortgage? How much is going to go towards groceries? How much is going to go towards our car payment? And so portfolio management is that model on a much larger scale. So think of it when a CIO or CEO gets a budget to improve the company, they're receiving millions or even billions of dollars. So they have to think, okay, how do we invest this money? How do we create new innovations that are going to transform our business? How do we create projects that are going to grow the business by either growing revenue or decreasing our expenses? And then how do we keep the business running? And you got to do all three at the same time. And so there's this orchestration and this categorization of how do we spend this money? And oh, by the way, we only have so many resources, and we got to make sure that the critical resources, we put them on the most important projects so that they can move the furthest and we can get those critical things done. So that's really the essence of portfolio management. But again, we can think about it in our own home. How do we manage our monthly budget?
Okay, so really you're talking about up-leveling our ability to make effective decisions,
Yes.
right? So
Yes.
a lot of your work is in the area of decision making.
Decision making.
When you say resource allocation, a lot of times I talk about not humans as resources, but humans have resources within them, right? So in our personal life, human resource management is managing that time, energy, and my daily tasks to make sure that at the end of the day, I'm better off than I started the day.
Exactly. So it's twofold, right? It's the resources that are for the whole organization, but it's also our own internal resources. And as you know, and we'll talk about, I have to really focus on managing my own internal resources because of some of the constraints I have in my life. But so the principles of portfolio management and constraints and those things, they can be used in so many different levels of an organization or down to the person's life in detail.
And that's obviously what I like to focus on, certainly with the MINDTRX podcast, is the idea that it's not so much on decision making as the decision maker.
Yes.
That I would like to focus developing our intelligence, our capabilities, the strategies, the ways in which we use what's given to us on a daily basis. And I've seen that certainly in working with you in your own life.
Yes.
You've really taken that to heart. You're developing leaders, but you're also developing the leader within.
Yes. And that's so important because like I said, we all have constraints and we all have to figure out, we only have so much energy. We only have so much time. We only have so much focus and energy. So we have to make sure that the decisions that we make and the things that we put on our plate to do are going to be things that are going to move us towards our overall goal. So that means that one, we have to have a vision of what we want our life to look like. We have to have this future that we're looking at, and we have to know where we are. And then we have to know that, as you teach, there's this emerging future that happens, and there's a learning, there's a feedback loop, there's all these things, and we have to take that into consideration. But most importantly is we have to start our day centered and focused on, okay, here's my big picture, here's where I'm going. I only have this much time today. What can I do today in these areas of my life that are going to move the ball forward in a way that I'm enjoying the process, as well as learning and growing through the process and accomplishing that future goal and managing all the different aspects of that.
Well, I love it. And I also really enjoyed your book, A Symphony of Choices. I've got it here. It's a beauty, and it's a business parable. So
Yes.
in Goldblatt's book, The Goal.
Yeah,
right?
the goal.
It's the idea of business teaching parable, and here's this manager or a musician who gets the opportunity to be a manager of personnel at an orchestra, and he has a colleague, a former business management professor, and gets together in coffee, and Dr. Richardson helps Jerry Hall by putting him in contact with this brilliant man named Gerald Leonard, who's published a lot in the area of project management. So I love the parable, and it's also written for everyone who wants to up-level their decision-making, their problem-solving, the way in which they allocate their resources. So I do really want to encourage it. Have you ever coached someone on how to read the book for their personal development?
I have, in fact, when I first wrote the book and I shared it out, and I said, listen, you don't have to be a musician, you don't have to know a lot about music, you don't even have to be a project portfolio manager. Just read the book and enjoy the story. And here's why I wrote it as a business novel. When I first read Dr. Goldratt's book, The Goal, I actually listened to it. I was doing some consulting with Freddie Mac, and I was traveling back and forth every day, and I would listen to it in the car. I got so captivated. I probably listened to that story 5 times, right? And then I bought the book and I read the book and underlined it. But the point of the issue is I learned so much about theory of constraints that eventually I didn't get a chance to study with Dr. Goldratt himself, but a lady named Dee Jacob up in New Haven, Connecticut, I spent 2 weeks with her and became certified in this concept of the theory of constraints. That's one of those certifications on the wall back there. But it was fascinating. And what I loved about it is that the theory of constraints is a very complex concept when you look at all the algorithms and things that goes into it. But the story of Alex and the supply chain and the whole building and what they went through made it accessible to me. It made it where I could sit and watch the story and whatnot. And as I was writing this book, Ted Lasso was a big deal on Apple TV. And so I binge watched Ted Lasso. I was like, yes, that's it. It has to have drama. It has to have all this quirkiness. He has to have issues going on as well as the teaching. And so that's the whole principle of the book. It's really written as a business novel that people can have, and it's accessible to them.
Well, the other thing that a story like that brings out, Gerald, is this idea that you referred to as interconnected adversities, because life is complex.
Yes.
Sometimes we think about walking on the edge of chaos on a daily basis. So how do we find our way through these interconnected adversities that are a part of what's going on while improving the way in which we manage our resources and make decisions in the face of these adversities?
Exactly. And as you're reading the story, you've probably realized that Jerry Hall had a torn rotator cuff. And I don't remember if you remember through our time together that Moi had a torn rotator cuff. And so my torn rotator cuff experience made it in the book.
Well, it's great that we can talk from personal experiences, right?
Exactly.
That's excellent. Well, so I'd like to make this shift, this idea that setting goals and managing life is really designed to help us succeed on a daily basis.
Yes.
And you've really organized what I consider to be a very inspired, very powerful way of sequencing the start of your day. Could you talk a little bit about all of the resources that have come together for you in order to help you start your day on a positive and empowered note?
Right. And so with that being said, there's a little backstory to why that happened, right? And I know we'll talk about it when we talk about the TEDx, but there was a major issue in 2018 with vertigo. And I lost the ability to walk. And so I had to do a lot of rehab on myself. And it left me with a constraint. My doctor said I had a disability. And I know the power of words. And so I would never call what I have a disability because I'm telling my body that I'm disabled over and over again. So I use the word constraint because I'm an expert in theory of constraints. And by having a constraint, which means that something is very powerful, it's just limited. So understanding that I'm still very powerful, but limited, then I realize in meeting with yourself, Jack Canfield, Dr. Bobby Stevens, I looked at all the things I was learning from you guys and put this structure together, which is one, I get up in the morning and I do probably about 10 minutes of yoga. And the yoga is simply to de-stress the body because every day life happens and our bodies will record and retain all of that stress. And it's going to put it in places in our body, in our spine, in our muscles. And so by doing a yoga routine that stretches out my glutes and my hips and my back and my shoulders, it allows me to release that stress.
I should also say that one of the brilliant insights that I got from Dr. Bobby Stevens is the idea that we're also increasing the body's capacity to carry a higher load of
Yes,
energy.
yes.
That by moving the spine, we're actually giving it more bandwidth or more power that it can transmit into our lives. So that's a great way to start. I do it as well.
And so I do that. And I do it also, and when I do it, I use these skull headphones that you recommended, which I love, and I wear every morning. And I do that, and I'm listening to theta wave meditation music or some form of meditation. So I'm actually falling on the floor, doing this process, getting into a meditative state. And when I'm done, I will either make a cup of coffee, and then I'll sit in one of my favorite chairs. I was usually in the back porch on the deck, and I'll grab my tablet and I will pull out my goals. And the first thing I do is I write down 5 things I'm grateful for. And what that does for me, it says, hey, I'm abundant. I'm living an abundant life right now. I don't have to have X amount in my bank account. I don't have to be driving the specific car or whatever. I can appreciate what I have right now. And that just opens up and increases my level of energy. Then I write out by hand my goals as affirmations.
Before you get into the affirmation, I just want to put an exponent on the importance of daily gratitude. There's
Yes.
been a lot of research about it.
Yep.
And even in the Taoist tradition, contentment and gratefulness are two of the organ systems that carry a tremendous amount of the power that we actually use to generate chi or that essential life force energy. So, super important practice. If you, as a listener, are not doing a gratitude practice, really consider it because it
It's a
is
game
quite
changer.
powerful. Yeah.
It really is a game changer.
So let's talk about affirmations and what are they for those who don't know it, and how does that work for you?
Sure. An affirmation is a statement of about a future state that I want to be in, but that I'm in now. And so I either write it as I'm grateful and excited that I am now doing X, Y, and Z. I'm leading a great podcast. I'm speaking all over the world. I'm writing great books or whatever. But also, which one of the things that you taught me was to also phrase it as a question and basically saying, okay, in how many ways am I so happy and grateful that I'm doing this and that? And that triggers my brain to not, if there were any limiting beliefs about that goal, the brain, it kind of quells that because the brain, you're not saying, this is who I am right now. You're saying, I just want to notice. I just want you to notice what's going on in my life where I'm seeing these things happen, right?
Excellent. And I love that also, that distinction about affirmations, Gerald, that so often a person will make an affirmation that isn't necessarily true for them right now.
Yeah.
And so what the brain does is switches it off. But if you can say an affirmation that shows that it is a state of becoming, it is actually in progress now, even though you haven't arrived at the end result, I am
Right.
now living my life congruent with that ideal end result. Now the brain goes, yes, I agree. And so your application of this is really important. I'm really glad that you're stating that.
And then when I do it, I don't get caught up in, oh, I got to write up everything perfectly and I got to write it all at one time. I will write it out and I will sit and I'll stop and I'll think. And sometimes I'll close my eyes and I will visualize myself living that, or I'll reflect on oh yeah, this happened the other day, or that happened, and my wife and I took this trip, or we did this, and we flew first class, and that's one of my affirmations. In fact, I'm in Toronto right now on a vacation, and I had to do this podcast, and we flew up first class. And while I was sitting there, I turned to my affirmation where I had, my wife Edith and I are flying first class to these places, and one of the places was Toronto. And so just gave her the phone and let her read it. And she just started smiling. And so it's like, hey, we're actually living, these things. And so she's starting to do it because she's seeing like, wow, I'm watching him do this, and I'm watching these things come into our life faster than ever. So here's the other thing that I do while I'm writing. I will also give my time and have a notebook next to me that intuitive ideas, right, will come into my mind. And here's what you got to understand about me is, as a project manager in my prior life before Vertigo, I would come up with a goal. I would think about it from the beginning to the end. I would plan out all the steps, and I would effort my way to accomplishing that goal. No matter what, I would figure out how to make it happen. Now, at the end of it, I was tired. I was exhausted. It took longer, and it wasn't always fun. Now I do this morning routine with the affirmations and meditations and so on. And all of these new intuitive ideas of how to accomplish that same idea come to me. So it's more of an agile, it's more as an agile way of pursuing your goals, because I'm open to, God and the universe providing me these intuitive thoughts on, hey, you should contact this, or Dr. Scheele, or somebody mentioned this book, photo read this book, or learn about this, or do this. And then that just opens up a whole new angle, and things start coming to me, and I become the vortex that's attracting.
I love this. So there's really two things that I'm hearing in your statement. Very often when we write out an affirmation or when we're making it, it's easy that would trigger its opposite. In other words, a belief that is opposed
Right.
to that statement.
Right.
It's equally important that we recognize the negative beliefs that the affirmation is triggering, because what that helps us do is then address those parts of us that are maintaining a negation, so
Right.
that we can work with them to shift and recognize, no, hey, come on, take a look. These are all the different ways it's happening. And then once you've done that, essentially what you've done is you've created this container of possibility. And
Yes.
the mind's best work is to sort for what it already believes to be true. So now it's saying, well, hold it, here's the way that you can do that, and here's the way,
Yes.
and here's the way. So it naturally begins sorting for the opportunities
Yes.
to create exactly that which you're holding in consciousness. So good on you. Another good testimony to why it's important
Yeah.
for us to be working in this space of affirmation, because it really is, in the models that you're talking about, it's about resource allocation.
It
It's
really
about the
is.
vision. It's about the mission that we're on, the goals that we're setting.
And it really is. And it's something that I learned from you from the book, Byron Katie. It's the idea of when a limiting belief appears, right? If I'm in the middle of a writing affirmation and this negative thought or this limiting belief comes up, I then take it through a process of, wait a minute, where did that come from? What is it? And I'll write it down. And I'll
Yeah.
say, who said that to me? And it was like, well, no one. Well, where did it come from? Well, remember this happened at, okay, well, okay, so, okay, brain, you're making it up again. And I will challenge it, and I will take it through a process, and then I will tap on it, and I will take it through, and I will use, and this is something I learned from Dr. Dawson Church, was the clinical EFT. And so I will tap on it with the karate chop, and I'll say whatever that negative thought was, and I'll repeat it, and I still love and accept myself. And then I'll take it through the 8 tapping points, and then I'll process it out. And then I'll do the gamut point on the back and all the things that go along with that. And okay, so now I've taken that thought that was going on, and I've totally eliminated it, and I've replaced it back with a positive thought, and my brain goes, oh, okay, and now we can move on.
Yes, in a private podcast, I interviewed Shelley Lefko, who also talks about eliminating beliefs. And the book you're referring to is Byron Katie, Loving What Is.
Yes.
It's a beautiful work. And also Dawson Church was interviewed on this podcast as well. And his work called Bliss Brain,
Yes.
among many of the works that he has done, does talk a lot about EFT, emotional freedom technique tapping. So,
Right.
okay, so we've got yoga, we've got goals, we've got affirmations, we've got belief work, we've got gratitude. What else is a part of your daily routine to get things started?
And once I go through that process, I will spend some time in prayer because I'm a spiritual person and biblical person. So I'll spend some time in Bible study and prayer. And honestly, I will spend probably now 2 to 3 hours, right? As a business owner, more than a business operator, I have some flexibility in my schedule. And what I learned just from even, the other day I was reading some things about Warren Buffett and Bill Gates and others, and they spend an inordinate amount of time reading. And so I realized that it's more about becoming. And so by spending that time in the morning, that 2 to 3 hours in the morning of just getting myself in state, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, then the one or two things energetically, because of my constraint that I'm able to do, right? I'm then able to give my best self to those activities. Whether those things are working on a book, another book, working on a podcast, working on a product, or whatever it may be, or being a part of a business meeting, I can bring my best self, my best thinking, and my best energy to those activities and move them further than if I was stressed out, overwhelmed, trying to do it from the seat of my pants and not really prepared in
Well,
that way.
I love what you're saying. There's a distinction between who I am right now, which we can hold in very high regard, just
Right,
as we are,
right.
contented, grateful, and put that next to who I am becoming. And
Yes,
am I living an inspired life to become that fully expressed individual that I am becoming? Because once we have established who I am becoming, all the resources of the
yes,
known universe are immediately flooding in to lift us up and bring us to that place. And it's done in this now moment.
yes,
So as you are envisioning and as you are holding these, the pure imaginal realm, the universe itself is always giving to us exactly what we need. And I'd like to take a moment, if we could, to shift this
okay,
to the idea of your work as a jazz bassist. Prior to you getting into project management work, you're a
right,
professional bassist.
right,
And there's a lot of important metaphors, I think, in jazz. The idea of being able to be in the present moment,
hmm,
real time. You're getting feedback from everything that's around us, and you're maintaining a sense of being agile.
yep,
You're streamlining your playing capability. You're being flexible to be able to sense and respond what's going on. And to me, these are such important metaphors for who we are as individuals in a complex society, who
right.
we are as employees or business owners, to be able to have these qualities. Could you say a little bit about how you moved from a jazz bassist to really recognizing this as a metaphor for
Right.
business?
I can. And so what was interesting is, I did my bachelor's and master's in music. And like I said, I performed professionally for a long time. And, in my prior life, I did a little bit of ministry work for a few years and got married and had kids and decided I really wanted to get back into music. The calling was for music was still there very strongly. And I made a decision that I didn't want to be on the road all the time and playing in certain places because again, that wasn't the way I grew up, and my dad was always there for me, and I could visually see him getting up and going to work and coming home and being there, and so I felt like my kids needed that as well, and so I owed that to them. And so when I got into IT, and I always tell people if I got into IT at the time, if you could spell IT, they let you in. And so when I got into it, I realized that project management was the thing that I was really good at. And I would go on these projects, but I was still doing music, right? So I was doing both. So I didn't
Okay.
just give it up. I was still doing both. I would still do shows. I would still record. I would still do concerts. And I started noticing, especially when I became a consultant, that if we had a great show, I may play music with people I'd never met before. But by the second rehearsal, we're all best friends. We know what each other's favorite color. And I mean, we're just really emotionally connected. And that's what music does. And I found that the same experience would happen on really good business teams, where people had unique skills, but they came together for a bigger purpose with the client, and we all worked together to see something come to fruition. And I started thinking, wow, this is so much like
Mhm.
playing jazz. And that was like my second book, Workplace Jazz.
Yeah.
And as I was doing this, I met a gentleman at the National Speakers Association. His name is Willie Jolly, Dr. Willie Jolly. He was like voted like one of the top 5 speakers in the world, and he's been trained by Les Brown as well. And he was a jazz singer, and he, got replaced with his club that he was playing at with a karaoke machine. And he built this career as a motivational speaker using music. And it was him and his wife that said, wait a minute, because I did a workshop with them. He said, hey, what you're doing is helping companies with their culture and this and that with the company stuff. He goes, but man, you're using music to do all these other great things. What if you really tied those two things together in a way that you never thought about? And it really put me on the road to where I wrote my first book in 2015, Culture is the Bass. And the idea of that one was just like the bass is the foundation of great music, company culture is the foundation for a great company or a great project. And that led me down this road of really examining what I learned as a kid playing music, right? I started playing when I was 10. And there were 3 things. 1, you got to practice. 2, you need a coach. 3, you need a band. Simple. And I
That's
started
great.
I started translating that into the world of project management. Okay, well, how do I practice project management? And who's my coach? And who's my band? So I would like read the books and practice using the tool and say, okay, this scenario, and I literally practiced. And then with the coach, I would look at webinars and I found people who were much better at what I was doing than I was. And I would reach out to them and have coffee and talk to them. One of them said, hey, write a book. And then with the band, I looked at associations, people who spoke the same language as I did, who I
Yeah.
joined project management organizations and got involved in that way. So they became my band. And I have literally used that model all the way through my career as a speaker, as a writer, as a CEO. I would always look for how can I practice this? Who's going to coach me? And who's going to be my band?
Well, it's interesting to me when you began to talk about it. It reminded me with every paraliminal that I created, the early days, the musician that I worked with, who was also the studio engineer, was a horn player, and he'd always begin compositions by establishing the bass line first.
Yes.
First it was bass, then it was drums. Now, up until then, as a pianist and as a guitarist, I always thought it was the melody that you start with first. But this was a big aha moment for me, and it makes sense because it's just like our heartbeat.
Yes.
If you've ever been to a concert and you feel the bass
Oh, yeah.
going in, you always feel it right here. And that sense of the pulse.
Yep.
And you wrote the book Bass as a Culture, this idea that there is a deeper pulse, something more resonant that everybody has to rally around. And once that's established, now we can play our melodies. Now we can accomplish
Yes.
what's
Yes.
important to us.
Exactly, exactly. And so, the bass, I mean, you can tell so much about a song simply by listening to the first couple of measures of the bass line. You can
Mm.
tell if it's a funk song, if it's a soul song, if it's a gospel song, if it's a country song, if it's a ethnic song like African or Indian or one of those other, different types of music, ethnomusicology kind of concepts. You can tell all different types of music simply by listening to the bass. And this is the interesting part, when people come into your store or your organization or your church or your family or whatever, they can tell from the vibe and the feel.
Mm.
And it happens emotionally. In fact, Judith Glazer, who I learned a lot about conversational intelligence, she passed away a number of years ago. but she would say within 0.07 seconds of a conversation starting, you know whether you can trust the person or not by what they're saying, because it happens so fast, but by the energy and the vibe that they're putting out. You can tell what's going on. So that culture and that bass line, like you said, when I play bass and I do keynotes, right? And I play my bass, and I use the bass specifically because I want the audience to feel me, right? I want them to hit the words that I'm saying, but I want them to walk away like, man, my heart, my chest, my body was moved because of the experience of not only just what he said, but the music as well.
That's great. And to the point about having your team, your jazz ensemble, you've hired a number of coaches, mentors to be a part of your team.
I
You had
have.
mentioned Les Brown,
Yep.
mentioned Jack Canfield,
Canfield.
you mentioned me. You
Yes.
have a few others, Rayburn, I think.
Yeah, Mike Rayburn. I'm working with Tony Robbins' team and their coaches.
You
I
have
worked with
writing
Dr. I
coaches.
have a writing coach, John Kramer, who wrote the book 1001 Ways. I mean, even with my podcast, I joined John Lee Dumas. And what I realized was that everyone who's at the top of their field,
Mhm.
they're accessible. They're accessible either in person, or if you can't reach them in person, you can listen to their podcast or their recordings. You can read their books. You can study their material. And by doing that, and as you change your energy, who knows, you may be sitting here being interviewed by one of your mentors and coaches as I get the honor and pleasure to be doing right now.
Well, it's my honor for sure. And to that point, what would you say to our listener about how to start that process of organizing their jazz ensemble?
I would say first off, um, it's the exercise of figuring out where do you want to go, right? Where do you want to go? And Stephen Covey has a great exercise of imagining it's your 80th birthday, and all these people are around you, and you've accomplished all the things you wanted to accomplish. What would people say? And what have you done at your 80th birthday that you would look back on and be proud of? That gives you a really good idea of where internally you want to go with your life. So
Mm.
once you have a clear picture of where you want to go, it's kind of beginning with the end in mind. Then you can look around and go, well, if I want to be a great author, I want to be this, I want to be that. Who are the people that are the best in the world at this area? And how can I learn from them? And then in your area may be, let's say, ice skating, or it could be hockey, or it could be football, or it could be being an artist, or it could be being a coach. Well, who are the best people in the world at this area, and what did they do? So what I would do is would go and look at everyone I admired, and I would look at where they studied, where did they go to school, what do they do, and try to learn as much as I can and go, wow, okay, are those things accessible to me? Can I read those books? Can I take that course? And if I can't, then how close can I get to it? Is it just their books or so on? And so then as you put your team together, and I realized that anyone who's done anything great, from Henry Ford to Barack Obama to Albert Einstein to Winston Churchill to yourself, Dr. Scheele, everyone has great coaches around them. They didn't do this by themselves. They
Hmm.
have people that they can say, I learned this from this. I mean, you talk about Dr. Win Wenger all the time. These are the people I learned from, I work with, or that inspired me, because we need people to help level us up to that next level and be a guidepost. And I always say your coach should be a tour guide and not a travel agent.
That's a good one. That's very good. Yeah, and I've had the great privilege of creating home study courses with some of the people I've admired most.
Yes,
Uh, Being able to work with Al Siebert on resiliency and Masanori Kondo on future mapping and
yes.
Jack Canfield on effortless success and on and on and on. there's so many great opportunities that we can create for ourselves once we understand where it is we're going and what's really important to us. So thanks very much for that. Now, I know it's about time that we're going to have to wrap it up here.
Sure.
And I'm wondering a little bit about how being purpose-driven, performance-oriented, and principle-led. I read that in your book or in one of the articles that you had posted in
Yeah.
Project Management Organization. This idea of being purpose-driven,
Yeah.
performance-oriented, and principles-led. I see this in the way you've organized your own life. It certainly is your life is a testimony to the espoused principles you hold, but also the lived principles that
Right.
you've embodied. So as a closing message around this for our listener, what would you encourage us to be able to do in our lives?
Yeah, I think the greatest thing that we can do with our lives is to leave a legacy that makes a difference in other people's lives. And, there are people who live and you never know they lived, right? Like they come and they go. And then there's people who lived that their lives have changed the world. And it may not have changed the world in a massive way, but it changed it in some way. And there are people who have a purpose for why am I here? What is my job for being here? Why did the creator of all wisdom place me on this planet at this time during this situation? What am I here to do? Because we all have a job to do. And it's not just to acquire stuff, right? It's not just because at the end of the day, none of the stuff that we acquire is going to come with us. It's right. We're going to go back to the energy force that we were. And so I really believe that you have to, first off, really get clear about your purpose. For me, my purpose has always been to make a difference in other people's lives and to make their lives better by having experienced me. That their lives are changed. And then you have a set of values or principles in which you're going to live by, and it should guide your behavior. And at the end of the day, can I lay my head down and say, I have done my best. I have made a difference. I've laid it all on the line. And as I get older, my goal is not just to rest out, but to rust out, and not to rust out, but to burn, and not even to burn out, but it's really to just flame out from the standpoint of just being so used and being so engaged in the process of life that, people are like, man, this guy left so much for us to think about. I look at the writings, and this is another thing I thought about too, and why I really got into writing, is that you can go back centuries and read writings from people, right? You don't really find too many videos, that just happened too long ago. But when you write and you put an article out or you put a book out, that can last for centuries or for millennia, right? Of having an influence on people's lives. And so for me, it's really about, is my life making a difference? I give to real quick, I give to an organization called Kiva, and it's about a micro lending to third world entrepreneurs. I started it in 2011. And the reason I did it is when I started my own consulting firm, I was scared and but I realized, when I looked at their stories and the challenges that they had, I realized how blessed I was. And that even if I could give $25 a month to a person I never would have ever met that would allow them to make their lives better, then I could know I'm making a difference. And sometimes it can be as simple as that.
Well, this is a powerful idea, and it's certainly in your TED Talk where you talk about practice is the performance.
Right.
To be performance oriented means you're practicing certain ways of being, certain things that you do in your day. And as you make these routines your life's habit, you're actually practicing the very performance that you will become known for.
Exactly. And it's really, really important. One of the things I realized as a professional musician, 95% of your time is spent in preparation. You're only on stage 5% of the time of your life. So the rest of the time is preparation or practicing or getting ready or learning or writing. And if you don't enjoy that, then you only enjoy the performance, then your life's going to be horrible, right? And so I realized that I had to fall in love with the whole entire process, the good, the bad, and the ugly, the times when it was slow and boring and I got to practice the scales. And so I just fell in love with practicing scales. I fell in love with doing the mundane things so that when I was on stage, because sometimes you get on stage and you're prepared and you're prepared and you're prepared and it doesn't go the way you thought. And if that's your only portion of joy, it's like, oh, this is really difficult. This is hard. But if it's part of the process and you're enjoying the ride, and then it's like, okay, hey, if I have a great performance, excellent. If I don't and I need to learn some things, great. I'm still enjoying the process. Beautiful. And enjoying this journey.
And every single day?
Every single day. Exactly. You get better and better.
That's so great. Gerald, thank you so much for leaving us on a high note. Great to be with you. Thanks for all the wisdom you've shared.
Thank you, Dr. Scheele, and I'm really honored to be here.
I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Gerald Leonard. You can learn more about Gerald at www.geraldjleonard.com. And now in the second part of the podcast, it's just you and me. I'll tell you how to use the Paraliminals sessions in the MINDTRX app to easily handle obstacles and move toward the success you want, especially as it relates to Gerald's message. If you're new to the relaxing Paraliminal audio sessions, they use breakthrough technologies to activate your whole mind in only 20 minutes to help improve any area of your life. Let's get going. Hello and welcome to the follow-on to my conversation with Gerald Leonard, where we're talking about creating a meaningful life of contribution from the Symphony of Choices that are given to us on a daily basis. And this is where we can talk about how to use paraliminal technology to make the most of some of the key concepts that were a part of our discussion. And I've broken it into 4 areas. Number 1 is managing your priorities. Second is starting your day on purpose. Third is connecting to the resources around you. And the fourth is finding your jazz ensemble. So let's talk about managing your priorities. Certainly one of the key priorities that we have is the use of our 24 hours in this day. And the beautiful paraliminal to help us with that is called conscious time, where you're really deciding how are you going to invest the time that you have today. You can't save time. You can only spend it. So as long as you're going to spend it, let's spend it in a way that invests wisely into the creation of the life that you're choosing to live. The second paraliminal, it would be the new action generator, because once you've established what your priority is, you want to be able to take meaningful action. Once we can make the decision to then take action and to be consistent and persistent in those actions, that's going to lead us to the end result that we want. Now, at the end of our conversation, we talked about practice is the performance. So this might include, in managing your priorities for the day, will you put in an hour of power at the beginning of the day? What is it that you will make a part of your practice that will lead to the end result that you want? The second area of paraliminal use would be in this concept of starting the day on purpose. And there is a great paraliminal that I did with Stuart Emery called Success Built to Last. And an important message that Gerald Leonard was making was that even if you're not doing something super well right now, you want to get better at it. Same message, success built to last, is choose to do something that you really enjoy. As Gerald said, 90% of the time or 95% of the time is not going to be on stage performing music as you might want. 95% is going to be spent doing all the things surrounding it. It's just that 5% of the time. So success built to last is how are you going to use that 95% of your daily routine to create the success that you're truly choosing to live into. The second paraliminal is fresh start, which I did with Bill Harris. It's this idea that this moment right now is always at the threshold of a fresh start, a new way to live your life. So use this now moment as wisely as you can. Fresh start is a great way to contemplate, how will you live this day? Now, the third area is about connecting to the resources that are all around you. And I say around you, but I also believe they're within you. And the number one paraliminal for this is prosperity, which suggests the universe is abundant. You heard Gerald talk about that. And from this abundance, your prosperity consciousness is your personal access to the abundance that's here. So when you believe that it is here and available to you, you are then able to attract to you and put into meaningful use the resources that are here. And some of those might be within. Clarity, purpose, gratefulness, sense of contentment in this now moment, joy, focus, peace. What are the practices? What are the resources that you want? Find them within or locate them all around you to bring them to you in a way that you can make the best use of them. So prosperity paraliminal, super powerful. And the other one in this area of connecting to resources is finding treasure. It's based on this idea of there's acres of diamonds all around us. We just need to recognize those diamonds in their raw form and being able to gain access to the great resourcefulness that is all around you at any moment in time. Work and develop your life, practice the life you're going to live by practicing it on the way you're living right now. That's really going to be able to polish those diamonds, those natural gifts and talents that are already a part of who you are. The fourth area is this idea of finding your jazz ensemble. And Gerald's a great example of a person who went out and sought the very best of the best to help out. I remember a story of a colleague of mine who decided when he turned 40s, in his 40s, that he wanted to compete at a world level at some sport. And he picked a sport he had never done before. It was rowing. And he wanted to compete on the world stage as a professional athlete. And so he found the best rowing coach. And before he even touched an oar or sat in a boat, he asked that coach to show him exactly how to do it right the first time so that he didn't have to unlearn any bad habits that may have existed. He chose rowing because he was quite an athlete himself, but had blown out both of his knees in the process. So he picked something else, and it turned out that he was awesome. Won first place at world competitions as a rower, beating out 20-somethings who are at the top of their game. So it really does help to find the best mentors and coaches. Gerald did it, and so how might you do it? There is a paraliminal called positive relations, and specifically session B is about attracting to you those people that can be most supportive to you and getting you to where you want to go. The second paraliminal is called creating sparks. Now, this is generally has to do with your relationship to another, and it's often framed in a romantic capacity. But if you listen to the way Gerald talked about connecting with other musicians and right away knowing their favorite color and being best friends, that there was a bringing together of the energies. And that's what creating sparks is really all about. So play with that. It could be really a lot of fun. And the final paraliminal in this area is living the law of attraction. If you know you want to attract to you those supportive individuals who can be a part of your A-team, that can be a part of your mentoring group that will help you get to where you want to go, living the law of attraction may be an excellent way to bring to you those folks that are going to make the biggest difference. Thanks for letting me be a part of the Jazz Ensemble of your life and for listening to this MINDTRX podcast. See you again soon. Thanks for being here. Thank you for joining me today. I applaud your willingness to maximize your potential. You can easily use the Paraliminal audio sessions in the MINDTRX app to stimulate your non-conscious mind, that is your inner mind, to reduce any resistance in your life and to propel you toward the success you want. Go to www.mindtrx.com/go. These amazing audio tools have helped millions, and I encourage you to bring them into your world today. Be sure to be back for more episodes of the MINDTRX Podcast. You'll find insightful conversations with authors, experts, and thought leaders, all devoted to improving your life's experience. Thank you again for being here on our MINDTRX Podcast.